Hello, everyone. It is Sadie now, and I'm going to be discussing the themes in the book Captain Underpants. And two themes that really stuck out to me were that adults are viewed as the bad guys, particularly adults in authority, and then a very similar theme is the overall disrespect of adults, again, particularly adults in authority. So on these two pages, you can see that Mr. Krupp, the principal, is very angry, and he's looking out of his window at a group of smiling, happy children. And so he's kind of in a weird position because he's a principal, yet looking at these children, he's just filled with rage. So I'm going to read a passage from this section in the book. Now, Mr. Krupp was the meanest, sourest old principal in the whole history of Jerome Horowitz Elementary School. He hated laughter and singing. He hated the sounds of children playing at recess. In fact, he hated children altogether. Mr. Krupp hated George and Harold. He hated their silly pranks and their wisecracks. He hated their silly attitudes and constant giggling. And he especially hated those awful Captain Underpants comic books. End quote. So while re-exploring this book, now that I'm older, my main focus was, like I said, the disrespect against adults. I think this passage is significant because of that. Throughout the whole quote, the main focus is the principal of George and Harold's school. The speaker portrays him as this mean man that hates children even though he works with them. Mr. Krupp is made out to be the bad guy because he doesn't like the boys' silly pranks and their wisecracks. End quote. But the children are not discussed in any sort of way that makes their behavior seem wrong. This particular passage is actually a glimpse at the boys' disrespectful behavior that continues throughout the text. They pull pranks, make poor decisions, yet the adult in this situation is seen as the antagonist because he is disapproving of this behavior. So on to another section in the book. On these two pages, Mr. Krupp is showing Harold and George video footage that he got of the boys playing pranks on the entire school before a football game. So I'm going to be reading another little portion. Quote, "How do you like the pregame show?" asked Mr. Krupp with a devilish grin. George eyed the television screen in terror. He couldn't answer. Harold's eyes were glued to the floor. He couldn't look. The tape went on, revealing all of George and Harold's behind-the-scenes antics. By now, both boys were eyeing the floor, squirming nervously and dripping with sweat. End quote. The video that the two boys were shown was of them putting pepper in the school's cheerleaders, pom-poms, and soap in the band's instruments. Again, Mr. Krupp is displayed as the bad guy. The text states that he had a devilish grin, which obviously points to the fact that he was, happy that he got the boys in trouble, and he was clearly just looking for them and waiting for them to do something wrong so he could punish them. And so also the boys are once again not portrayed in a way that makes them look like the ones in the wrong. They are portrayed as nervous little children when being confronted. So this part of the book and the previous one I mentioned both take place at the school, and about half of the novel takes place there too. So in this next section of the book, Mr. Krupp has already been hypnotized by the boys, and they are just sitting in his office trying to think of what to do with him now. Quote, "The boys looked up at their principal, who had been standing behind them in a trance all morning. Gee, I almost forgot about Mr. Krupp," said Harold. "What should we do with him?" "Do you want to have some fun?" asked George. "Why not?" said Harold. "You are a chicken," he said. Suddenly Mr. Krupp leapt onto his desk and flapped his arms. "Cluck, cluck, cluck, cluck," he cried, kicking his papers off the desk behind him and pecking at his pen and pencil set. George and Harold howled with laughter. Let me try," said Harold. You're a monkey." End quote. So this passage occurs after George and Harold hypnotize their principal, like I said. Again, this scene takes place at the school and also shows the pattern of disrespect of adults throughout the story. The boys are having Mr. Krupp make a fool of himself by making him believe under hypnosis that he is a chicken, monkey, and eventually Captain Underpants. In the process, of paraphrasing, I would mention that the boys are said to be laughing at their principal because of hypnotizing him. They are having him partake in humiliating acts that he is not consciously aware he is doing. The fact that the boys are blatantly disrespecting him as an adult by doing this is what stands out to me. George asks Harold if he wants to have fun, and they end up taking advantage of the fact that their principal is under hypnosis. By this, the audience is shown that making fun of adults can be something entertaining, which is not something that is good for children to read, that, making fun of adults is funny and, fun to do. On this last section of the book that I'm going to show you, Mr. Krupp is obviously screaming at the boys, and the boys are just laughing at him. And so I'm going to read a little passage and to help give you some background on this particular section. Quote, "Well, you're gonna cry when I give that videotape to the football team," shouted Mr. Krupp. "I've had it with you two." Principal Krupp took the videotape out of his filing cabinet. "You boys are dead meat," he sneered. He stormed out of his office with the video and headed toward the gym. End quote. This passage takes place after Mr. Krupp has been hypnotized into thinking he's Captain Underpants, runs around town trying to stop crime, and then is brought back to reality. Again, the running theme of adults being the bad guy is shown again. In fact, Mr. Krupp seems to regress to childlike language when he calls the boys, quote, dead meat. This is part of the reason this passage stood out to me. Mr. Krupp is threatening to out what the boys did to the entire football team rather than simply giving them detention. This part of the story shows the disrespect of adults that is shown throughout, because the boys are just laughing at him when he is clearly angry. And also, like I've stated previously, the main adult is seen as the bad guy until, that is, he's turned into Captain Underpants, which is a man that runs around in his underwear. So, as I was saying before, Captain Underpants is a story that shows blatant disrespect for and dislike of adults and authority, and I think that it's understandable that people would ban this book because of that.